With is 2013, Barack Obama, in his second inaugural speech, he said, "We the people declare today that the most evident of truths is that all of us are created equal. It is the star that guides us just as it guided our forefathers through Seneca Falls, Selma, and Stonewall. There is a line that goes from Stonewall to Augusta Pride, and it began on a hot summer night in 1969. A moment arrived when a community said enough. It is difficult to imagine that a person could be arrested for gathering together, your lives could be restricted, families could be ruined, and you could never be heard from again. Stonewall represents an instance when a community galvanized to fight government persecution. The Stonewall Inn, which still exists today and is a national landmark, is a visible reminder marking the birth of a movement that sheltered the disenfranchised, helped the fearful, closeted those that were closeted during a period of time they found shelter. These people were powerless at this particular time. They were subjected to city-sanctioned harassment. It was illegal to serve a gay person alcohol, for gays to dance with one another, and a woman could be arrested if she was not wearing at least 3 items of feminine clothing. At 1:20 a.m., police arrived at the Stonewall Inn and decided to arrest everyone in the bar. However, this time the patrons refused to willingly participate and validate discrimination with silence and cooperation. A lesbian complained that her handcuffs were too tight. She was struck with a billy club. This was the tipping point, and a movement was born. This act of disobedience lasted for 6 days, and it marks a moment when a community stood up, refused to be oppressed, spoke up, and marched toward equality. The following night, thousands of people gathered at the Stonewall Inn. The resistance was not planned. However, the community found its voice and a rallying cry. Prior to Stonewall, people of my community were ignored, despised, and invisible. The 6-night riot represents my community fighting back. The name Stonewall is a call to arms, a symbol that galvanizes our community, that we're going to stand up and not be exploited, that we're not going to be degraded. Stonewall was not the first act of civil disobedience. American history of the 60s is a tumultuous time. The Black Civil Rights Movement, the Vietnam War, women's equality, the hippie counterculture, all of these shaped our country. The LGBT movement and many of these movements that started in the 60s continue today, and that breaks my heart. So in June, we chose to commemorate, and we choose to commemorate Stonewall and use the tools of activism, diplomacy, and celebration to remind our friends and families and neighbors and coworkers that we thrive, we support our communities, we contribute to our communities, and that we exist. So why do we still celebrate Pride? Because diversity is a gift. All that makes us unique and marvelous, those are our treasures. So we celebrate ourselves, and we remember the giants who started the movement and gave us voices. Marsha Johnson, Sylvia Rivera, both transgender women of color, Virginia Apazzo, Martin Boyce, Raymond Castro, Danny Garvin, William Henderson, Jerry Hoos, Carl Keller, Tommy Langland Schmidt, Dick Leish, Jack O'Brien, Electra O'Mara, and Yvonne Ritter. Pride is about spreading hope that not only can things get better, but things will get better, but we're not going to forget the battles, the lives lost, the pain suffered, Pride matters because in a world built on straight privilege, we say it is okay to live authentically. Pride matters because I no longer want to exist in shadows. Pride matters because I will no longer accept verbal and physical violence. At its essence, pride is a humanizing celebration that touches everyone. Too often, public discourse will shame and silence and terrify people who identify differently. So this is a moment where we can proclaim who we are. So why does Stonewall still matter? And how did Stonewall and pride save my life? For too long, I validated myself on how others saw me. But what I was doing, I was sanctioning how I allowed myself to be treated. I was not embracing my identities. I was being held down by them. Oldest child, Southern, military brat, educated, activist, Black, male, gay. Many of these identities I had embraced, but there was always the weight of expectations, my desire to live up to others, what others expected of me to do, the life plan that others had put in front of me. Was I going to live up to their expectations? Was the weight that I carried around with me for so terribly long. But a profound revelation happened that my living for validation was rooted in shame. The shame of my gay identity. And that shame was being used against me, by me, to shame me. This was my internal struggle. Don't look too gay. Can they see I'm gay? Stick out your chest. Act more masculine as possible. Pretend to like things I didn't, hold conversations about things that held no interest to me. The struggle lived in my soul and it impacted every decision I made. Shame played a very broad topic in my life for a very long time. It was a personal barrier, and I protected myself under the banner of loneliness and no personal connection. I became a guarded person, very deliberate in how I presented. I code switched my language, my dress, and my mannerisms. For me, the shame manifested in my desire to disappear. It manifested as anger. It manifested as self-blame. It manifested as addiction. I felt less than, not good enough, not handsome enough, not smart enough. Once that took hold, I felt I needed to be better than you just to be as good as you. I felt I had to be better than you just to rebuff any close examinations and difficult questions. It wasn't until I began to see the visibility of my community, people that looked like me, thought like me, loved like me, that I was able to take steps toward giving myself permission to embrace my identity as a gay man. I began the work to unravel the tools that I had placed in my life of withdrawal and isolation. I started to recognize that I had to embrace the fact that there's vulnerability in my life. And that vulnerability, or running from that vulnerability, led to the feelings of shame. And I had to deconstruct this shame. I have come to realize that in order for me to love others and give to others, I must love myself. Guilt, blame, anger, and shame have held me back from loving myself. I had to rescue myself. Because of Stonewall, I was able to rescue myself. For me, shame was, at its essence, a disconnection. By finding a family, by finding friends, by finding a community, I learned how to accept my gay identity. I would really, truly love to exist in a world where uprising against oppression wasn't necessary, but sadly, we don't. So I'm grateful for the Marshas. I'm grateful for the Sylvias. I'm grateful for the Virginias. I'm grateful for the Martins and the giants who've come before me that have allowed me to become free, to become the man that I am, to have the voice that I have, to have the community that I have that embraces, supports, and rises up to meet me where I am. So Stonewall matters because there is a direct line to 2019. Stonewall matters while states acknowledge the federal mandate of marriage equality, there are still areas of housing, employment, public accommodations that still treat members of my community differently. So Stonewall matters to remind us that there is still much to do. It matters to save lives. It matters to make it easier for others who come after us. It matters to be a lamplight on the path and guide the steps of those who come after us. So in closing, what are my lessons? When I appreciate myself, I appreciate and value. I cannot be what I cannot see. I can live beyond my brokenness, and my identity is not an obstacle. Thank you.
Thank you, Lonzo.